Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're tuning in from. I'm excited today. We're going to be looking at Libronix, some tips and tricks for Libronix users. And I'm really excited about our guest speaker today. Our presenter is one of the Logos pros, Adam Borres. He has years of experience with our software, reaching all the way back to the Libronix days. And he's here to bridge the gap a little bit, but to offer some free training. He's also going to be presenting you with a special deal. And that deal is going to be good as you watch the webinar today. Just a little bit about the Logos Pro team. This is a team that exists to offer free software training, and they're here to teach you what you need to know about Logos, but also you get to learn a bit of the Bible along the way. So that's what Adam's team is doing. They're continually creating video content for you to help you master Logos Bible software. So in just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Adam, but as always, if you have questions throughout the webinar, we'd be glad to answer those in the last 10 or 15 minutes. You can send those to webinars@logos.com. We'll be fielding some of those a little bit later, give you a chance to chime in. So we look forward to our time together. Again, stay tuned for the special deal as Adam's going to walk you through that. Adam, thank you so much and welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Glad to be here. Today we're going to be spending some time doing a high-speed book study of the book of Acts, particularly focusing on how to use Libronix to find background information, look up biblical people and places, and lay the groundwork for a Greek word study, even if you don't read the language. Now, this session is especially for you who may have got a Libronix package 6 or 8 or 12 years ago, and you feel like there is still a lot to learn to get the most out of that investment that you made. But I know that a lot of you watching have already installed a newer version of Logos, like Logos 4 or 5 or 6, and you're using just the free core engine of that. That's great, using the same library and features that you started with in Libronix, and this session is going to be beneficial for you as well. And along the way, we're also going to explore some of the tools that we have developed over the last decade to help your Bible study even easier. And I'm also really excited to tell you that we are going to give some of those tools to you for free today, just as a thank you for joining us. This is unprecedented in the history of Logos, where we're going to be giving away some of the data sets that are exclusive to our program. And so you make sure to watch to the end of the webinar here to learn how you can take advantage of that. Okay, so we're going to jump right in here. Into Libronix. And we're going to start right out with our book study of the book of Acts. I'm going to close the ESV that I have there. And we're going to start right here at the home screen at the study passage. And I want to start out right at the beginning of Acts, Acts 1 through 11. And notice that I didn't even have to put in the colon there. It kind of puts that in for me. Click the go box. And if you've ever used our software at all, this is going to look really familiar to you. You've got your preferred Bible loading up here on the right-hand side, and we've got the passage guide loading up on the left-hand side. And the passage guide is simply going to give you access to all of your commentaries that have to do specifically with this passage, and a lot of other information drawing from your library that has to do about this passage. So let's take a look at the text here. So in Acts 1, we're kind of picking up right off where Luke left in his gospel, talking about what Jesus is. Jesus is ascending into heaven and how he leaves them, the instructions that he leaves them as they're going forward in their ministry. And if we take a look at verse 7 here, he says, "It is not for you to know the times or seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you. And you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth." Okay, and what we're going to see here is this phrase here, in Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, and to the end of the earth. That is almost an outline for the entire book of Acts. This is a geographical outline. So we wonder what that looks like. What are those? Where are those places? And what does that represent? Let's start here in the passage guide, scrolling down to the map section of the passage guide. We're just going to click to open that up. This is a map that's been specifically tagged from the Logos Deluxe Map set. By the way, I should say that I'm using the Libronix Scholars Library, the version that came out in 2006. It's got about 300 resources in it or so. And a lot of you will probably have a package very similar to this. So the Logos Deluxe Map Set is one of those resources that came in the Scholars Library at the time, and it's been specifically tagged so that it shows up as a map in the passage guide relating to this text. Now, if we look at that map, it shows the resurrection of Jesus and subsequent events. And what we see here is a map of Jerusalem. And if we hover over each of these number points, it'll tell us what happens in what order and where that happens. Okay, so this is a good starting place, but not necessarily what we were looking for in terms of what does this look like, Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. So let's find out where else can we find out. Let's say Judea, for example. I'm going to click on this little button right here that says Toggle Contents Pane. You can see that little filled in pane right there. If this is a little hard for you to see, you might want to put the video full screen. Look down here on the bottom right of the video, and there should be a marker there to go full screen on the video. So again, I'm just going to click on this button to toggle the table of contents. And I'm going to open another map here called Palestine during the Ministry of Jesus to get a broader view of what the area looked like in the time of Jesus and the early church. And here you can see we have Jerusalem right here in the center. Judea, along with Idumea, is the territory surrounding it, and Samaria, the area above that. So what we can see here is when Jesus talks about in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria, he's talking about an outward expansion. We start with Jerusalem in the center, it expands out through Judea and Samaria, and then finally to the end of the earth. Okay, so as we're starting out our book study here, of course, the first thing that you would want to do is read it, and we don't have time to read the whole book of Acts today, but we're going to be hitting some highlights. And then after that, you'd certainly want to get some background information of the book. So how would we do that? Let's scroll up here to our commentaries, and let's take a look at the background information that we have available in our commentaries. So let's start, for example, with the Bible Knowledge Commentary. And when you click on a commentary from the passage guide, remember, these are commentaries that are specifically about the passage that you have loaded up, not necessarily just making a quick reference to it, but it has a specific entry about it. And it's going to load to that entry specifically. Now, since we're at the beginning of the book of Acts, what we can do is scroll up to see if this commentary provides any background information, and indeed the Bible Knowledge Commentary does. You can see that we have the purpose of Acts, we have the introduction, and we should have, here we are, the person who wrote the book, when they wrote it, and then often an outline of the book as well. Now, not every commentary has this. Let's say if we click on the Bible Exposition Commentary, we have very little introduction and very little background information. If we have the Outline Bible, a great little resource to see a full outline of a book of the Bible, but again, has very little background information, is not going to give us what we're looking for in terms of who wrote this, why did they write it, when did they write it, what was their purpose, and so on. Here's another one that I like, the Bible Reader's Companion, right here. So if you have that, go ahead and click on that to open it up, and then scroll up, and we can see a chapter summary of each chapter of the book of Acts. But if you keep scrolling up, there's the outline we were talking about. And then it gives you a great at a glance, who are the key people, who wrote it, when was it written, what are the key events, and then we even have a very high overview theological outline of Acts. And we're going to come back to that in a minute. Now, I want to take a minute and kind of review what we've done so far. So we're looking at, we see Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth. We look at that on a map and we see kind of an outline or an imperative that Jesus is giving to his disciples to spread outward. And then we've started to get some background information. Now, I want to take us a moment here and switch over to our current version of the software, Logos Bible Software 6. And this is the same library that I'm using in Libronix. I've only installed just the Logos 6 engine with the same set of 300 or so resources. I haven't added any books in the library. The only difference that I've added here is that we've added on the feature crossgrade to this account, which means that we're going to be getting some new tools to work with to access the same information in that same library. So here we are. We've got the passage loaded up. Let's go ahead and hit go here, and we see that although this is a much more robust layout, it's still basically the same thing. We've got our prioritized Bible, our preferred Bible loading up here on the right. You can see that it's actually stacked with other versions of the Bible as well. And we've got the passage guide on the left. We've also got some other tabs open, like the Bible Knowledge Commentary. Our preferred commentary is already loaded up automatically. It's not waiting for us to click it. And we've even got the exegetical guide loading automatically in the background here as well. Okay, so let's just take a quick look to see what we could do to access the same kind of information even more quickly. So we wanted to look at Judea, first of all. And if we scroll down in the passage guide, we've got a lot of the same sections that we talked about already in Libronix, and we've got a couple of new sections here as well. And here we have biblical places. Now, this is similar to the map section that we have in Libronix, but what we've done is we recognize that this word right here, Judea, is not simply the letters Judea, but that represents a place. And we have spent hundreds of man-hours going through the entire Bible and tagging which of these words is actually a place. And in addition to that, we've gone through all of the maps that you have in your library and identified which of these maps have that place. Not only that, but which of these are tagged in this passage, and that these are not simply images, but these are maps with that place in it. So we can see a representation here of Jerusalem, Samaria, Israel, and we could click to open up any one of those maps that looks relevant to our search. And what I'm really excited to tell you today is we are giving you this Biblical Places data set for free. This is something that we developed in Logos 4, and we are going to give that to you for free. So if you're already using the Logos 4 or 5 or 6 engine, if you've already got that installed, you will see today when you open it up, it'll begin to download those new data sets for you, and you will be able to access that information much more easily from now on. And not only that, but in Logos 4, we did the same thing for biblical people and even biblical things, like if there's a boat or a rope or something in the text that we recognize as a biblical artifact. And those data sets also came out with Logos 4, and we are giving those to you today as well. Now, what we've just recently came out with Logos 6 is the Atlas tool, and this takes maps to even the next level. Let's go ahead and open the Atlas tool. Let me drag that over to the right location on the screen here. Okay, there we go. And what's great about the Atlas tool is it is zoomable and interactive. And you can see it's automatically loaded a map that is relevant to our study. This is Jesus' post-resurrection experiences. And these are the maps that are relevant to the passage that we've entered. Now, what if we just want to get more information about Judea? Let's go ahead and close that reference, type in Judea, and load that up there. And again, we see a map that represents, we see that same outline of Jerusalem in the center, surrounded by Judea and Samaria, and then going on to the ends of the earth. And again, this is something that I have available in this example package because of the feature cross-grade of Logos 6. Okay, what was the next thing we did? We looked and for background information. Well, we have all of the same commentaries that we had in Libronix. We have the Bible Knowledge Commentary. We can load up the Bible Reader's Companion and everything else that we had in Libronix. It's the same library. But we have a new tool in Logos 6 called Factbook. And Factbook is a great kind of one-stop shop for any fact that you're looking about the Bible. You can look up people and places and facts and topics in the Factbook. And what I want to examine right now is the book of the Bible itself. We type in Acts. We find an entry for the book of the Acts writing. And when that loads up, we see all of that same information that we were looking for organized automatically for us. We see content, an overview of the book, outlines of the book. Notice that this is drawing from the Bible Reader's Companion, from the Bible Knowledge Commentary. We see in origin, we can find the sections on authorship, the date, the purpose. This is drawing from the same library that we had in Libronix, but much easier to access, so we can compare. We can find which commentaries have this information, and we can compare from resource to resource what information they provide. All right, let's switch back to Libronix. And we're going to skip down to one of the next main sections of the book of Acts. We're going to skip down to Acts 8:1, and this is a tag for chapter 8, which I simply click on that, and it jumps right to that verse. And we can see here that we are starting that progression. Up to this point, Peter and the other apostles have been in Jerusalem. We see in Acts chapter 1, there arose a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem, and they were all scattered through the regions of Judea and Samaria. So we see that progression almost forced on them, but then fulfilling the mission that Jesus has given them nonetheless. Now, we also see our first mention of Saul here. If you scroll back to chapter 7 a little bit, we have that famous episode where Stephen is being stoned, and in 8:1 we see Saul approving of his execution. So an important step in Bible study is recognizing who are these characters, what is their story, where are they coming from. Now, you probably know who Saul is, but let's just suppose that that's what we want to do with this character here. How can we find out, just for starters, where else does Saul occur in the Bible? What I want you to do is right-click on Saul. Whoops. Okay, scroll back down to verse 1. Right-click on Saul, and this is what opens the context menu. And we want to choose selected text, Saul, and then it pops out with what we want to do with that information. And I just want to click on search. Now, search, which you can also access up here on the tools menu, toolbar. Search has two kinds, Bible search and basic search. And since we've clicked on it from a Bible, it knows that we want to search a Bible. So here we go, entering Saul, and then we have our different options here, and we simply click on search. Okay, and we have 424 occurrences, but right away, you see we have a problem here. And you probably already know this is a Saul in the Old Testament in Samuel, the first king of Israel. So this is not relevant to the search that we're trying to perform here. So let's try that again and limit it just to the book of Acts. Select a text Saul, open your Bible search, and in range here, instead of Bible, let's simply type in the range Acts. Okay, that's much better. We have the results for Saul, but here we have another problem. And as you already know, Saul has another name. Saul also goes by Paul. So let's try it one more time. I'm going to close that search one more time. Open the Bible search, and this time enter the operator or. All capitals or indicates to look for either one of these words, Saul or Paul. It remembers that we've got it in the book of Acts, and search that. And that's much closer to what we were looking for. Okay, so that gives us an idea of how important Saul or Paul is to the narrative in the book of Acts. It doesn't give us much information about who the man is, though. So let's perform another action on Saul. Go to selected text, Saul, and when you choose your selected text, you have a bunch of different lookup options here at the bottom of the action menu. And these are all dictionaries with an entry for Saul. Now, we can look up Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, probably won't have much information. We can look up any one of these Bible dictionaries. Or we can simply execute key link, and it'll open the first dictionary that we have here. Again, Merriam-Webster's isn't the most relevant that we want, and I'll show you how to change that in just a moment here. Okay, now let's also suppose we wanted to get opinions about Saul from several different sources at once. We can choose Execute Key Link Summary. And that loads up a report for every resource that we have, every reference resource that has an entry for Saul. And here we can compare Harper's Bible Dictionary with Easton's Bible Dictionary and so on. Now, as I said before, Webster's is a great resource for looking up the definition of a word, but is not really helpful for finding information about biblical characters or facts. So let's go to Key Link Options, and we can set which resource we want to be at the top of the list. You can see here data type is already set to English. Saul is the English word, so that's the data type that we want to use. If we can also do this for all kinds of other data types. This can get quite complicated here, but say if you're just looking up a Greek word or a Hebrew word or a Greek Strong's number and lots of other reference types, you can choose that here. But for now, we'll just leave it set as English. And I happen to like Easton's Bible Dictionary, and we'll select that and click Promote, so that when we close that and close the key link summary, Easton's Bible Dictionary will now be the default for looking up English words. And I'll show you a shortcut here. Instead of right-clicking, going to selected text, and then execute key link, the shortcut for that is simply to double-click on the English word. And we have, there we go, Easton's Bible Dictionary loading right to that particular entry. Of course, that's filling the whole screen here. Probably a good idea to adjust that down to the bottom of the screen and make sure that it lines up exactly with the windows that are behind it, so that we get these tabs and we don't lose the other resources that we have open. Okay, now here we have an entry for Saul, but again, we're showing the same problem, that this is an entry for the Old Testament Saul rather than the Saul that we're interested in. So I want to show you again, just quickly jump over to Logo 6, and I'll show you how we've solved that in the current version of the program. Okay, so I mentioned earlier how we have tagged all of the biblical people and places in the Bible, and I'll show you what that looks like in this verse. So again, I'm going to open the context menu with a right click. It's a little bit different now. Now we've got all kinds of information that's been embedded into that word, information about that word on the right, and then the actions that you can perform with that information on the left. And we see that this is identified as Paul the person. I'm going to select that and then open the fact book. And again, this biblical people data set is one that we're giving to you for free, so you should be able to do this in the current version of the program now. And what do we have here? We have an entry about Paul. We have our Bible dictionaries that all have relevant entries about this Bible character and not any other Saul that might be showing up. And what if we want to put a different Bible dictionary on top here? It's very simple to do in the current version of the program in Logo 6. We click on Library. We find the resource that we want. Click on Prioritize here. All you have to do is click and drag. And whether this is an English dictionary or a Greek dictionary or whatever kind of reference it is, your program will automatically know when it's appropriate to use that and when to put it at the top of the list. And the higher you put your resources in this preferred list, the more often the program is going to use it in the fact book and in the guides. So you have access to all of that now with the Biblical People data set. There's another new section that we added in Logos 5 called Referred to As. And that brings up another point. When we're doing a search for simply Paul or Saul in Acts, that doesn't find all of the places where he's referred to as something else. He's referred to as man or prisoner or apostle in many places. In many places, he's not even named at all. It simply says he or him or you, referred to as a pronoun. And this referred to as section, again, we came out with that in Logos 5, and that also is part of the feature crossgrade that we've got going on with this packet, with this installation of Logos 6 right now. There's also a lot of other information here. Semantic Rules is even more in-depth search. We're going to be talking about that just briefly a little bit later on when we look at word studies. And then we also have library results and lots of other related information, including media and events that all have to do with Paul. All right, moving back over to Libronix. Let's see, refer to my notes here. Okay, we're going to jump into kind of the next section of the narrative here. In Acts 13, once Paul converts, you see him going all over from place to place. And in 13:13, Paul and his companions come to Perga, and wherever he goes, he is presenting the gospel both to Jews and to Gentiles, and his message is always something of the same. He always tries to make it relevant to the people that he's preaching to, and he always preaches the prominence of Jesus. And there's a word that often comes up that Jesus was condemned. Now, let's jump in here to do a Greek word study. What is Paul saying with condemned, and how do we find out that information? Now, this is an English Bible, of course. So what we're going to want to do is load up a Bible that has that Greek information available. Now, if you have the New American Standard 95, this is a great resource for that. Again, make sure that you resize that window so that we don't lose the ones behind it. There we go. What's special about the New American Standard as well as the King James Bible in Libronix is that these are tagged with the Strong's numbers. And if you're familiar with Strong's, in the 19th century, they went through the entire Bible and developed this numbering system to make it easier for people who don't know the language to look up Greek and Hebrew words. Okay, we're looking at verse 27, condemning. We want to right-click. And again, instead of selected text this time, we want to go to selected references. We find the Strong's number here and execute the key link summary. And here we can find the different Greek lexicons that we have in the Scholars Library with entries for that word. And what if we want to find where else that word occurs? We can do the same thing, selected references, go to the Strong's number, and then I'm going to choose speed search this resource, and we can see that this word occurs all throughout the New Testament. And what we notice is that it doesn't always mean condemn. Sometimes it's considered, sometimes it's decided, has a lot of different meanings to that word. And that is something that's a little more apparent using the Bible Word Study Guide. So I'm going to close these Strong's Numbers references. Now, if you have New American Standard Bible, great. If you have a little bit of a newer package like this one, the Scholars Library that came out in 2006, you also have what's called the Reverse Interlinear Bibles. And you have just that for the ESV and I believe for the NRSV. And what we see here is this is a very special resource. Let's actually move that up to the top. This is a very special resource because a traditional interlinear is a Greek text that then gives you the English translation underneath the Greek word to give you an idea of how that is translated. The trouble with those is they're not readable. You can't just pick it up and read it in English because the Greek words are in a different order. So if you try to read the English words, it's very difficult and very cumbersome to read. So what we've done with the ESV is we've taken the English translation and then we've put the Greek source words underneath it, the words that the translation is derived from. So again, let's scroll down to verse 27 for our example. And then we find condemning or krino. And when we right click, we see Bible Word Study on krino. And we see our key links here. It's doing very similar to what we did with the key link summary, but it's also loading up grammatical relationships. How is this word used in the syntax structure? When is it used as a subject? When is it used as a predicator, and so on? And then we also have the translation wheel. We have the Greek lemma, krino. Lemma simply means it's the dictionary form of the Greek word. And then how is it translated into English in the English Standard Version? It doesn't take into account how it might be translated in other versions, but we can see that it's often translated judge or judging, or condemn or condemning, but also is translated decide or deciding. So we have this range of meanings, just like the English word judge. Sometimes it means a moral judgment, a condemnation, but judging in English can also mean evaluating or deciding or even putting on trial in the legal sense. Then we can find where this Greek word occurs in the Greek New Testament, and it even breaks down the results according to the exact morphology. If you know the Greek language and you're looking for an exact construction, there's a way to do that in both the New Testament and way down at the bottom here for the Greek Septuagint, which of course is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Very, very useful tool if you're starting to use a Bible word, if you're looking into a study of the original language. And again, just want to quickly show you how we've further developed that in Logos 6. Let's get to our verse here. Okay, we find condemning. And we have the reverse interlinears now in Logos 6 that are now available for all of the major translations. So English Standard Version, New American Standard, New Revised, New Living Translation, NIV, just about every popular translation you can think of, we now have those interlinears available. And now they're actually embedded right into the text itself. You can just click the interlinear button and it loads up that information right there. And again, this is something that I'm happy to say we developed for Logos 4, And since we are giving you the logos for datasets today, you get these interlinears again for free just for joining us here at the webinar. So let's load up our Bible word study on condemning or krino. We're going to right click again. The type of data we're going to choose is lemma and Bible word study. And we have the definitions of the lemma. This is very similar to the key link summary. We have the translation, and you can see much more clearly in Logo 6 that it is most often translated as judged, judge, or judges. Okay, now let's limit our search here. We don't want krino just in the entire New Testament. Let's limit it to the book of Acts. And we can just type that in here. And you can see that the translation in the ESV is a little more balanced. We have lots of variation in how it's translated, but still most often translated as judge or judged. And if we like, we can even hover over this title bar here and change the translation we're looking at. If we want to look at it in the New King James Version, for example, and we want to see how do the translators of the New King James affect that a little differently. And in addition to that, so you should be able to do this with those logos for data sets. In addition to that, there are some brand new sections that we've added to the Bible word study that you can get with the feature cross-grade. You can see what is the root. And keep in mind that the lemma is the word that's being used in that passage. The root is where does that word come from, and what are other words that come from the same root, and how are they related? We can also see the different senses. And we already saw how it was translated differently, but here we get at, in this verse, we have this line here on the interlinear. The sense means, in this verse, means to condemn. A scholar here at Logos has gone through the entire Bible, actually a team of scholars, and helps you determine what sense or what meaning is this word being used in this sentence. And you can even go through and find, you can search for where are those senses being used. Clause participants. We looked earlier in Libronix of how, when is it being used as a subject or a predicator and so on, with those grammatical roles or those syntactical force. In Logo 6, we can also look at semantic rules. Semantic rules meaning what is the meaning here? When is Paul the patient or receiving the object of judgment? When is God the agent? When is God the one doing the judging? Some fantastic data sets that we've added into Logo 6 that are all available through the feature cross-grade. All right, moving back to Libronix. We're almost through here. And this is one that, moving on to Acts chapter 15, I'm going to jump to 15:20. This is a passage that my pastor was actually just speaking on this past week. And it's at this point in the story, there's a sharp theological debate. There are new Gentiles that are coming to the faith, and the Jews are trying to decide, is Christianity a Jewish faith? And if it is, do they need to follow the Jewish laws and the Jewish customs? Most poignantly, do they need to be circumcised? There's some big stakes here. And what they decide is, no, we believe in Jesus as a matter of faith and grace. We are not going to require the Gentiles to follow those Judaic laws, but we will write them a letter of some things that they should follow. And if we look at verse 20, write to them to abstain from the things polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, and from what has been strangled, and from blood. And we see the text of the letter in verse 29 here as well. So the interesting thing is, I know that there are other passages in the Bible where food sacrificed to idols is not a big issue for Paul. So how do I find those passages that have to do with that? Let's go back to our passage guide. We're going to reload that to 15, 20 through 29. Oops. There we go. Okay, and we have our cross references here. Treasury of Scriptural Knowledge is a fantastic resource which shows us what are the things being discussed in these verses and what are other verses that discuss the same kind of ideas. Okay, now we take a look here at the things sacrificed to idols. And if we look at 1 Timothy 4:4, Paul is writing to Timothy, for God, actually, let's open that reference just with a click here. And if we scroll up, we can see the entire passage. Paul is saying to Timothy, some who are forbidding marriage and require abstinence from foods that God has created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. For everything created by God is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving, saying that food is acceptable. There's another passage, let's see, I believe in 1 Corinthians. Here it is. Both in 1 Corinthians 8 and again in chapter 10, Paul discusses that basically the same thing. Food will not commend us to God. We are no worse off if we do eat, no better off, or if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. Okay, so why, if Paul is writing in these other contexts that it doesn't really matter, then why is it important that the Gentile believers in Antioch are abstaining from that food? Well, and we find the answer in another cross-reference. If we scroll down to verse 29 in the Scripture Knowledge, take a look at Romans 14:14, where Paul says, nothing is unclean in itself, but it is unclean for anyone who thinks it is unclean. So who thinks it is unclean in this context? It's the Jewish Christians that live alongside the Gentiles in Antioch. And Paul goes on in Romans to say, for if your brother is grieved by what you eat, you are no longer walking in love. So here we have a very important theological concept, two theological concepts. Number one, you are not bound by the Jewish law, but if you do choose to follow that law, if your conscience prompts you to do that, you should do so. And if your brother is following that law, you should not do anything that causes him to stumble. Let's click the back arrow and go back to the passage that we were at here in Acts. Okay, I want to take just a very brief detour over to Logo 6 again and do the same thing. Load up Acts 15, 20 to 29, and we find the same information there in terms of cross-references, but there is another new data set that's added in Logo 6, available with the feature cross-grade, called Ancient Literature. And I want to make sure that that's loaded for the full passage range here. So we see how powerful cross-references can be. Ancient literature takes that concept and expands it across the ancient world. Where else is this passage mentioned or alluded to, or the same ideas discussed across all of the apostolic fathers and church fathers? Where is it mentioned by Josephus and Philo and other ancient Jewish historians? And Are there parallels in even the Old Testament pseudepigrapha? So you can imagine how powerful this search can be and how much more informed your understanding can be when appealing to these ancient sources. Not going to dwell too long on that. We're drawing close to the end of our time here. So I just want to jump to the end of Acts. Jumping to Acts 25, where Paul is accused by the Jews. He's on trial by the governor, Festus, and he appeals to go to Caesar, which is his right as a Roman citizen. And what we see is there's kind of a long detour where he gets tried again, he gets lost at sea, and then finally makes it to Rome. And in the very last verses of Acts, we see that he lives there in a rented house at his own expense and welcomed all who came to him. While he's awaiting trial, he welcomed all who came to him, proclaiming the kingdom of God and teaching about the Lord Jesus Christ with all boldness and without hindrance. So you can see how this harkens back to the end of the earth, which Jesus starts the book of Acts with this mission to fulfill. And now Paul is in the heart of the known world and indeed spreading that message. There's a lot more that we could spend time showing you. There's lots of other ways that Libronix can expand on this information, and lots of other ways that we've organized that in Logo 6 as well. Just for example, let's look at the timeline. The timeline is a tool where we can see what is happening in the church or in the Bible during a certain time period and what else is happening in that time. Here we find the date for Paul's trial in Rome. And in fact, I have an article in my dictionary that discusses that. We have the clause search. Clause search was a tool that we came out with in Logo 6. And we can, if we want to find, for example, everywhere that Paul is the subject of a sentence. Libronix had a very advanced tool called syntax search where you could do a similar thing, but clause search makes syntax search so much easier and accessible for everyone to do these advanced kinds of searches. We have a new tool, a new guide rather, called the Sermon Starter Guide, where we can load up Acts 15, the example we were looking at a moment ago, and we can see what are the themes that are identified in this passage. If we wanted to preach on it, one of the themes that we talked about was fellowship and unity. So let's open that. It launches a sermon starter guide with key passages that talk about that idea and preaching resources that I already have in my library that are specifically related to that. And there's even suggested outlines that we can follow for making up my sermon. I can go on and on here. There's some really advanced sections here. Back to the passage guide for cultural concepts. What if we didn't know what idol worship refers to in that day? We can discover the cultural concepts that would have been brought to mind when the first readers of Acts read this book. And then finally, we've just got some fun things. The interactive media, I'll show you just a couple of those just because those are fun for everybody. Let's say, for example, the before and after. If you want to know what did the amphitheater look like in Ephesus when Paul was there in front of the crowd that was rioting, here's what the site looks like today, and here's what we think it looked like, an artist rendition of it at that time. There's another one called native character maps or narrative character maps. And we can see, again, we can see the whole narrative of Acts and who is with whom. and what happens throughout the whole book of Acts. Lots of other things here that I don't have time to go into, but I hope you can see how valuable a tool this is. And let's see, what I want to do for is encourage you to look into that. We do have that feature cross-grade on sale right now. We are giving you the free logos for data sets, as we've already talked about. You get those for free no matter what. And what that means is, with the Logos 6 feature cross-grade, you are treated as a Logos 4 owner, and you get the pricing for that as a Logos 4 owner as well. You get an additional 15% off. And as always, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee. And even if you decide the feature cross-grade isn't for you, you get to keep Logos 6 installed with those Logos 4 data sets. Again, that's biblical people, places, and things in the passage guide, and the reverse interlinear Bibles that are really important for that original language study.
Well, Adam, thank you. That was it's impressive to see when you compare working through the same passage, comparing what Libronix is capable of, and then checking out what Logos has been up to for the past 10 years, and just seeing how things have been improved and how even we can work some of these new features into our workflow. Thank you for taking the time for that. We do have a couple of questions I'd like to take for the rest of the time. We have about 4 here. I'm going to just pick 2. The first one comes in asking, how can I tell how different Bible translations render a word? I know you looked at one translation of Krino from the ESV. How can I compare how multiple translations render a specific word?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's open up Libronix again. We'll start with that. Okay, so we were looking at the English Standard Version, and it's actually really simple. Let's use our example of Acts 15. And up here on the right, you see other tools, and we can simply open passage in parallel versions. And then we can add as many different versions as we want here. Say we want NRSV. And we can see side by side all of those different versions. Now, you may also have, if you have the Scholars Library like this one or higher, you may also have another tool called Compare Parallel Bible Versions. And what that does is highlights the difference between the two, using your first version as the base version, and it'll tell you, based on what other translations you selected, how different it is from the base translation. Of course, we have that in Logos 6 as well. There's a really neat little tool in Logos 6 that I'll just highlight as well. We have the information panel here in Logos 6, and there's a translation section. So all you have to do is hover over a word, and it'll very quickly tell you how is that translated in every different translation you have.
Thanks again, Adam. That was very helpful. One question, the last one that we'll take, I've even had a question about this, and a fear that I had as I was upgrading. This user has a lot of notes, a lot of highlights that they've cataloged in Libronix. Will they transfer if they upgrade to Logos 6? Are they in danger of losing that information? Can you answer that?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so let's just review what we're talking about here. In Libronix, we'll close that. You can go to File and create documents in the program. So a note file is kind of like a note folder or a notebook. I've got one here started on Acts already. And just background information and just a couple of notes that I've added, and I can actually attach those to the verses in the text. So what the user is asking here is, well, am I going to lose this work? Can we get that into Logos 6? And the answer is you absolutely can get those into Logos 6. And if you have them on the same computer, if you have them both installed on the same machine, it's extremely simple. All you have to do is type in import all in the command box here. Takes just a moment to import that. And then when I go to the Documents menu, here I can create new notes and other documents as well. But look at this. Here's the Acts note with the same information that I had created in Libronix.
That's great. That's very comforting. Thank you so much for your time again, Adam. Again, if you tuned in late, or maybe you'd like to watch this again piece by piece, or maybe you want to share it with a friend, you can always check out the archive webinars at logos.com/webinars-archive. And good news, if you do take advantage of the feature Crossgrade, on September 8th, we are going to be doing another free training session for anyone that purchases that piece of software today. So if you upgrade to Logo 6 feature Crossgrade, you're automatically subscribed when you purchase to this next webinar on September 8th. So please mark your calendars. We're going to be going through some of the tools and tips and features of the latest software version. Again, we want to continue to hear from you. So in the future, if you want to email your thoughts or questions to us, hit us up at webinars@logos.com. Thank you so much and have a great day.